Hey guys, it's Dr. Leith, and I'm going to go over cognitive processing for trauma. I hope everybody's well. I hope this semester is treating you nicely. I hope everybody's taking care of themselves and their loved ones. Thanks for your patience with this semester, and I think we're making it happen. I know there's a lot of changes. Always feel free to reach out to me. Either while you're in school or even after you graduate, if you ever need help or information or additional education, I'm happy to give that. Don't ever hesitate to ask questions. That's what my professors and mentors did for me, and that's something that I want to pay forward. So if you think it'd be helpful, always feel free to stay in touch, and I'll give you as much information as I can. So with that, let's dive into cognitive processing and trauma. So last time we met, we went over affect regulation or emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and the need for psychoeducation with trauma, going over what is trauma, what is PTSD, what are those symptoms about, how the brain works, all that rich information from the Jim Hopper video. So now we switch over to CBT, right? We kind of dabbled with the big, explosive energy that can be emotions and triggers and symptoms and stuff. And now we're moving into thoughts. Really regretting my choice of font colors here. So a little bit of CBT. I get that you have probably gone over this not only in your theories class, but probably in your group class, as well as any undergraduate psychology classes you may have had. CBT, very popular. Beck was the guy. And so, just real quick crash course for CBT, just the broad strokes. So, if anybody's like an expert, I'm sure I'm leaving plenty out. But it's a short term modality, right? 6 to 20 sessions. It's hyper focused. We're going to focus on the here and now, the present. We're going to set a goal and we're going to identify some problems and we're going to work through it. Very structured, and the use of homework, right? This is where the concept of homework for counseling came in. Man, I am itchy. And we're going to focus on identifying and managing thinking patterns. So this is very much kind of a training approach of helping a person understand how they think, what they're thinking, why they're thinking that way, and if there's any validity to what they're thinking. So, many people will describe experience. If you were to say what happened, they'll say X happened, then Y happened. I got in an argument with my spouse, and so I went out and got drunk. This person cut me in line, so I hit him. I heard a loud noise, and then I called 911, right? So it's this, then that, just that simple, right? Now you and I know it's not that simple. However, that's how when a client comes in, that's how it's likely to be expressed. What's missing is this idea of automatic thoughts, right? Which Beck brought up, and this is the stuff that's in between the situation and the response, right? So they happen quickly, they happen automatically. That's where the name came from. And so they're implicit. There's not reasoning. It just happens. So an example would be if someone came and started banging on your door in the middle of the night, your probably automatic reaction would be something's wrong, right? Whether that means danger or somebody needs help or something, but something is wrong. And that's an automatic thought. You just go to the place of something's not right, don't know what it is, but it's not right. And then I respond. And that might be, for some people, it's grabbing a weapon, calling 911, talking to their spouse, talking to their parent, head under the covers, whatever it might be. But there was some thought of, I'm in danger. I'm not safe, right? They hear, in the case of trauma, let's take a combat veteran who maybe has some trauma stuff going on. They hear a loud noise. They think, I'm under attack. And so then everything kicks off. But then underneath the automatic thoughts, because where did they come from, are rules and assumptions about the world, right? And so this is what guides the automatic thoughts. So in that example of banging on the door in the middle of the night, well, I assume people aren't going to bang on the door in the middle of the night. And I assume if they did, it's probably for no good reason, right? There's something bad going on, right? So these assumptions and these rules, they come from all sorts of places. Little ones and teenagers pick up on it through observation. They're seeing what happens with their peers, right? They're seeing if I don't have the newest, most cutting edge fashion, or I guess now it'd be like phones and devices and stuff. If I don't have the most current iPhone, then I'll be disliked, then I'll be made fun of, right? And that may have come from observing. Sometimes it comes from family stuff or cultural things. And the other part is it's an assumption. Sometimes people just make assumptions that come from nowhere. They're literally assumptions. So there's a situation, there's some underlying assumption and rules, right? So think of this like a computer program in the background. And those assumptions and rules kick off, that activates the automatic thoughts, which leads to the emotional or behavioral reactions. And then finally, peeling it back one more layer, we have the core beliefs. So Beck goes on to say that these core beliefs are sort of the fundamental thoughts of the person. So you have your surface level thoughts, this is what I'm thinking. The automatic thoughts, which just are implicit, they happen. They are fed by the assumptions and rules, and the assumptions and rules are built upon the core beliefs. So if the assumption and rules are a computer program, the core beliefs are the just underlying computer architecture, right? So it's whatever makes a computer run, right? So it's all the way at the base. They're fundamental. They tend to be absolutes. Example questions for core beliefs would be, everybody wants something. All men are this way, all women are that way. I can't trust anybody. Everybody I can't trust, right? It can be positive and negative, right? And so those are all the way at the bottom, those core beliefs about the world, life, everything in between. They build the assumptions and rules. They feed the automatic thoughts. Situation occurs, automatic thought happens, and then you have your outcome. So with CBT work, we then focus on metacognition, which you will recall from your theories class, which is thinking about your thinking. And that's what we spend our sessions doing, is giving them the tools and almost training them on how to think about their thinking, how to take a minute, how to take a deep breath, really think about what you're thinking, what you're feeling, slow it down, and let's look for faulty logic. Let's look for evidence. Maybe you're absolutely right, right? So we want to train them in session, so that way when they're not in session, they're doing it on their own, right? Counseling is a job where you're trying to talk yourself out of a job. Like I said, we want them to slow down, be able to. So if I had a magic wand and had this amazing client who was really motivated for change, I'm a great counselor. We fast forward to our last session. What is that person walking away with? The ability to slow down and say, okay, let's take a second here. Let's say that my department chair gives me some critical feedback. Maybe she says something to the effect of, boy, Dr. Leith, I'd really like it if you would cover more RCT, relational cultural theory. And my immediate reaction is, she doesn't like what I'm doing, right? And so I need to slow down and say, did she really say, I don't like what you're doing, or that what you're doing is wrong? No. What did she say? I would like for you to talk more about RCT. That's it. There was nothing other than, more or less than that, right? And so we want our clients to be able to slow down and do that, right? So they're late for dinner with their spouse, and they come to session and they say, oh my God, she's gonna leave me because I was late for dinner. It's like, where did you get that? What happened? Why I was late? And she said, next time could you call me and let me know? Okay, well, she said next time, right? Or where did she say she's gonna leave you? Where did that come from? And it may have come from some very valid past experience, but is that thought accurate now in this context? And that's what we want them to be able to do. Um, the goals of CBT: become aware of thoughts, right? That I'm having them, be able to assess them, the veracity and validity of them, identify emotions, manage the emotions, and manage behavior. So for us, cognitive interventions with trauma, so that's kind of the general broad strokes for CBT. Cognitive interventions for trauma are, we're going to focus on the negative thoughts or views about myself, right? It's that I'm no good, I'm broken, I'm damaged, I'll never be happy, I don't deserve to be happy. The nature of trauma and the trauma, right? That um, I was asking for it. I should have been more prepared. A real man would have done this. Of others, that I can't trust others. Everybody's looking at me funny. I've got this scarlet letter on me. Remember that book? That book was a trip. And the future, that I'll never get over this, or I'll never be happy again. And thoughts about the trauma symptoms, right? That you'd be surprised. Certainly, I was surprised at the number of people who had trauma symptoms, whether it was a full-blown PTSD situation, or maybe it was just a few symptoms here and there: nightmare, sleeplessness, hypervigilance, where they thought that they had that and that was their punishment. This is what I get for doing whatever I did. And that in itself has some thoughts, right? That implies that you were doing something wrong. So, what I want to talk about now is cognitive processing therapy. So, we before we went online, we talked a little bit about processing and discussing trauma. And so, cognitive processing therapy has been shown to be very effective. It's by no means the only way. So, still explore other methods of working with trauma, but it has quite a bit of promise to it. And so, with this, it's a technique to help understand the trauma. And by the trauma, I mean the actual traumatic event. It's dyadic in nature. They're going to talk, you're going to talk, and we're going to go back and forth. It's done over multiple sessions. This is so not a one and done thing, right? It takes time. And it includes homework. So, moving on, so this is the broad strokes, just to kind of lay the foundation. The client recounts the events with the counselor. So we have set up things. This is probably not something you're going to do in the first session. It might not be something you do in the second session. You're building rapport, letting them know. And you're also letting them know if you're doing something like this, part of your informed consent is this is going to be uncomfortable. So we're asking them, tell me what happened, right? So if you're taking this approach, this is very much an approach where the client is going to have to speak about the trauma, and that can be hard enough. Now put in there all that Jim Hopper stuff, right? There might be some memory gaps. There might be some distortions. There might be some details are present, others aren't, right? So that's where you're working with them. However, and I don't want to spoil the end of this, is that the more they talk about it, the more details will come. So they tell you what happened. You listen, you probe when you need to probe. Tell me about that. Tell me more. Do you remember anything else, right? When appropriate, right? And it might not be right away. It takes a lot of tact, it takes a lot of rapport. Don't trade your relationship for moving quickly. You use your basic attending skills, especially the reflection, right? And the purpose of this, anytime you're using a reflection, is so that the client hears something being said back to them. So here, in this case, the client's telling you what happened with the traumatic event, and you're going to reflect it back so that they can hear what they just said. And the counselor asks questions to point out cognitive distortions, which you remember from your theories class, and we're going to go over shortly. And this makes, in theory, the client consider a different perspective. So, it's things like you're reflecting back, someone is telling you their story and they say, I shouldn't have gone that way. I should have listened to my friends. I shouldn't have been drinking. And you would reflect back, you feel that this is your fault. And they hear that, and they, maybe not right away, will start saying, I guess I do feel that way. Or, well, no, nobody deserves it, right? But they're hearing it back to them. And the idea is we're reflecting back what they're presenting, which is in turn a reflection of what they're actually thinking. So you have to do a couple things, because it's not just tell me what happened and I point out like how you're wrong, right? It's the counselor has to show that talking about the trauma is okay, right? That this is a safe place. I'm not judging you. I'm not blaming you. You're still in control. Now remember, and this is probably it's not specific to me, but this is how I kind of lean. Regardless of the type of trauma, that person was already invalidated once. They had control taken away from them. If they don't want to talk about it or they're having a reaction, you let them have the reaction, right? Because we want them to know they do have control here. It's safe to talk about the trauma. It's safe for them to have the reaction, whether it's crying, whether it's locking up, whether it's anger. If they don't want to talk about it, I think you should respect that. Now, yes, that contradicts what I said earlier about there's going to be an expectation of them to talk about it, and that is true. And that's where I go back to, or at least with this, I practice more DBT, is that, yeah, you don't have to talk about it right now. Maybe now is not the time for counseling, right? Maybe you're just not at a place. But yeah, if you're going to use this, if you're someone who says this is a really useful tool, a useful way of working through trauma, we kind of got to bridge that gap of I want to respect your right not to talk about it, and also to make this thing work, you have to. And that's where you might share that sentiment and just say, why don't you schedule an appointment with me later on, or maybe we can just talk about it a little bit. But the most effective interventions with a positive outcome occur while the client's actively thinking about the trauma, right? So while they're thinking about it, we're grabbing those distortions, or we're helping them point them out. That's more effective than, well, why don't you think about the trauma and look at this handout at home, right? Speaking of handouts, so here's a handout, and there's lots of them online. I think I grabbed this one from Positive Psychology, something or other. But this is a list, and I'm sure there's more, of cognitive distortions, right? So these are also good to remember just in case they're on the NCE. But all or nothing thinking, overgeneralizing, mental filters, perfectionism, labeling, all this stuff. So these are types of cognitive distortions, right? So here we're educating the client, give them a handout, right? This is good, especially because later on we introduce using thought records. We want them to be familiar with these things because they need to be able to identify if they have these habits, such as catastrophizing, which is something I absolutely do, right? Like, I'm running a few minutes late to the faculty meeting, I'm going to get fired, right? And it's probably not going to happen that way, but it feels like it, right? Jumping to conclusions, mental filter, right? Every semester I got to go through this, right? So I get my teaching evaluations, and, there's like 40 people in our section. 39 of you say really lovely things, or even have some constructive criticism. And then one person is like, I didn't like them at all. So out of those 40 comments, which is the one that you think I'm going to think about all night, right? Yeah, just the one, right? So mental filters, jumping to conclusions, emotional reasoning, right? You're just acting off of how you feel, not necessarily what's actually happening. Labeling, this is what I do. I ruin things. I'm a ruiner. Overgeneralizing, disqualifying the positive, right? This is refusing to accept the compliment. That's a great shirt. It looks really nice on you. Oh, I hate it, right? Shoulds and musts, personalizing things. This is all my fault. So we want to I help them identify these things so they can stop later on outside of session to see if they're doing them. We want to focus on their negative thinking in conjunction with the cognitive distortions. So when they say, I could have done differently, well, could they have? Right? If you're a child, you're a survivor of childhood abuse or sexual abuse, and you're saying I could have or should have done something differently. Well, is that true? Right? That adult that was hurting you had much more power than you. Or the person who says during the assault, why didn't I fight back? Well, because your brain tried one of these other survival strategies. I was asking for it. I shouldn't have upset him or her. I deserved it, right? So we want to focus on that negative thinking, right? That's one of the first things that you would attempt to remedy or work with them if it was present. And there's two ways of doing the CPT, right? With the trauma. You can do it verbally or have them write. So let's go over those. Verbal, we're in session, and you're going to do this again. You're going to do this multiple times. It's not you do it one session and then all your other sessions focus on that. It's going to be, session 3, tell me what happened. Session 4, do you mind telling me again? Session 5, we're going to keep going, right? And so we dialogue with the client, just like I said before, and we process what they come up with as a function of their homework, which is usually writing. And so you might say to them, between now and next session, I want you to write as much as you can about the trauma. Or you might swap in a better word than that. But I want you to write about the trauma. And I want you to write as much as you can. It might be overwhelming. If it's too much, then I want you to stop, but I want you to try. And I want you to read what you wrote before our next session. And that can be overwhelming. And so, yes, there's catharsis in writing. There's lots of great research on that. It's not just journaling. There's a lot of other stuff. James Pennebaker, he is a psychology professor at UT. He has a lot of really great research on the beneficial aspects of writing in counseling. But they're writing it and they're reading it. And this is stuff that you can try, writing down different experiences you have. It's also really overwhelming. So we want to encourage them that, yes, this is overwhelming. Stop when you need to stop. Try, though, right? Try your best. So before I move on, hopefully that makes sense, that we want them to write about the trauma. They'd read it. And then when they come into session, you might have them read what they wrote to you. You'll definitely ask questions like, what was that like writing it? What did you experience? Give me a feeling word. What was it like reading it? How do you feel about what you wrote this week? So I thought about trying to demonstrate this, and I'm kind of a one-man show these days, so don't really know how I'll demonstrate it. But I'm going to think about something. But the goals here are to help identify negative thinking patterns, right? And give the client skills to identify the distortions out of session, right? And so this is where I go back to the mindfulness stuff that we talked about. When they start getting overwhelmed, right? We want them to do maybe some of the mindful breathing, to take a second and to think about what they're feeling. Where's that feeling coming from? A thought. What is that thought? Where's that thought coming from? Right? Especially in the context of the trauma, when they're having thoughts about it, right? That it's my fault, I'm getting triggered, I shouldn't have ever done that, everybody's right, I'm no good, right? And so remember at the beginning of the semester, we talked about post traumatic growth. Well, at the end of our work with this client, we want them to be able to say, okay, I'm feeling this way, I'm thinking this way, and this is some of my stinking thinking, right? This is some of my faulty logic, or this is a trauma symptom, right? The intrusive thought. We want them to regain some of that control. The goal is never to forget that the trauma happened or to pretend like it was there to minimize its significance. It's kind of like saying, here was your life after, and here's your life now. And we put them together. It's like taking two rulers, you put them together, and no matter how close you get them, there's always that little seam in the middle. Here is before, and here is after. And we want a bridge. What we don't want is, here I was happy, and then here there's nothing, right? My life ended with the trauma, right? So that's how we get growth, but we got to get them to understand ways that they're thinking that are helpful and ways that aren't helpful. We focus on distortions of future events. I'll never be safe again. I can never be in a relationship. Nobody's going to want me. I'm damaged goods. And I'm stuck here forever, right? So not just the trauma, not just the self, not just others, but also the future. Now, for those of you that like more narrative work, there is a narrative approach to doing this. And this is another term for it is context reinstatement, right? So this is really important. Repeatedly discussing the trauma leads to a more cohesive narrative, right? Meaning, remember what Jim Hopper said, the first time they might only remember broad strokes, a few details, but every time they talk about it, there's more and more, and the story becomes more and more fleshed out, right? That's what we want. And so we help this, and you might say, that person might say, I don't remember anything except for like the sirens going off. Or I don't remember anything except for a certain smell, right? And so you might ask questions like, well, what comes to mind when you think of sirens? Or what does that smell make you feel, right? And so they're building these different details to get the full narrative, right? To get the full story. And there's a lot of research that shows that having a cohesive narrative, so there's no gaps, right? And I don't mean like just little details. Like when people have big chunks, like I don't remember, or someone has so much to drink that they're kind of rolling in and out of blacking out or passing out, having a cohesive narrative reduces a lot of symptoms, right? It reduces it all because we're filling it in. They're getting all that information back. They're regaining control. They're regaining confidence. So although it almost sounds counterintuitive to keep talking about it, and it is going to be uncomfortable for them, most likely their level of comfort will start up here. It's going to take a dip the more they talk about it, and then go back up after some time. And it's not just about getting used to it, right? It is the act of examining those thoughts and filling in missing details. So the secondary outcome of CPT is anxiety reduction. So there's a lot of anxiety that follows a traumatic experience. When the person talks about it, this is a real in vivo kind of experience. The client's in session, they're talking about anxiety, or they're talking about the trauma, they're amping up, they're feeling some anxiety, they're closing off, their systems are firing, they're getting nervous, hypervigilant. Well, anxiety tells us what? Anxiety tells us be ready. Be ready. You might not be safe. Be prepared, right? And so they're expecting something really bad to happen. And then nothing happens, right? And that's what we want to that's a good place to be, right? To get them to a place that, okay, I'm feeling anxious. and, right, that's a very DBT thing we don't say, but I'm very anxious and I am also safe. I am very scared and I am safe here. And so the idea is they're getting used to that feeling of anxiety, that feeling of discomfort, and they're learning it's a thought and it's a feeling. It's not an absolute. It's not a foregone conclusion. It's not definite that something's going to happen. I'm feeling this, and there's a reason for it. I had this really awful thing happen to me, and I am also still safe. And when we tie all of this together, the client leaves with insight. They have a different level of understanding or a different way of understanding what happened, the actual trauma, right? They have a different idea of what it means. They have an understanding of why they reacted the way they did, the fight, flight, free, or acquiesce. That they probably really couldn't do anything else, and they have a different understanding of any symptoms they might be experiencing. That is a natural thing. It is not a punishment. You are not damaged. That is a normal response to an abnormal situation. Now, getting this insight, they might kind of cognitively know that. When does it seep in enough to really start benefiting them? Not immediately. It takes a little bit of time. But later on, when they're having a hard time or when they start noticing that their trauma is affecting their relationships or their job or school or whatever, and they're able to say, here's what's happening, this is what's happening with me, I'm having these thoughts and these feelings and stuff like that, then they're benefiting from that insight. That's it for the cognitive processing. I hope that was useful. Next time we'll dive into what do we do with the feelings part of everything, right? How are we going to manage feelings from day to day? Not just the intense feelings like we talked about last week, but now just here and there, what do I do? I hope everyone's well. Keep taking care of yourselves. If you have any questions or comments, if there's anything I can do for y'all, please let me know. And I will. I really wish I had a better sign off. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll just talk to you next time. Bye.